Now, when we talk about Dominican Republic rums, it is very much a tale of two brands. And we're talking Barcello and we're talking Brugal. Keyboard warriors, hang fire, all will be revealed, don't worry. But it is very much a tale of two brands. But there is a little bit more in-depth knowledge, not too much. We're not talking Jamaican GI or Martinique GI, geographical indicators, rules and regulations. But the Dominican Republic does have a couple of rules that you have to abide by. Now, notice in the intro, I did say brands because Dominican Republic gets a little bit more complex, and I'm going to give some homage to someone in particular in a second. But you know, I did say brands at the top because we associate a couple of brands with Dominican Republic rum, but we kind of need to deep dive into distilleries before we go any further. Now, distilleries, again, there are two. Okay, there is Brugal, which is the distillery. And then there is, I'm going to have to refer to my notes here because I'm terrible at pronunciation, Alcohol Finos Dominicos. Hopefully I've said that right. Now let's just get the rules and regulations out of the way for a start off. Now, as I said, there isn't too much of a GI. I'm just going to, it's not called a GI from what I can gather, but you know, they have got certain rules and regulations that they need to adhere to in Dominican Republic. And essentially I'm going to pick three of them out. So the first thing is they must be, all the rums there must be aged for at least a minimum of 1 year in oak barrels. Okay, so Dominican rum must be aged for 1 year in oak barrels. The second thing, it must be at least 37.5% ABV. So again, you know, not much of a GI, you know, that's a typical rum GI globally. You know, all right, certain countries say 40% ABV, but 37.5% is the bare minimum it can be. But here's the big kicker, which not many other islands, countries can actually adhere to. And the big kicker is that all rum must be produced using sugarcane grown within the Dominican Republic. Now, to emphasize that point, Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, how many other big rum producing nations, countries, islands do you want to sort of drop? They all import their own sugarcane. You know, let's get that thing clear. Barbados are not self-sufficient with sugarcane. Jamaica is not self-sufficient with sugarcane. Guyana, Demerara Distillers Limited, are definitely not self-sufficient with sugarcane. All rum that comes out of the Dominican Republic must be made from sugarcane or sugarcane molasses that's come from the islands. Now, before I go any further down this journey, I should have said this in the last video, but as we start to get a little bit niche into these islands, should we say, it's so flipping hard to find knowledge. My knowledge, I've got a fair bit of decent knowledge about Barbados, about Guyana, about Jamaica. You know, a lot of rum people know those sort of knowledge. It's very well publicized. When you get down to Dominican Republic, to, you know, Puerto Rico, to Cuba. Cuba I had a little bit of knowledge about, but not too much. This is where Matt and Carrie's book comes out to play. And this flipping thing is phenomenal. And before I go any further down this rum journey, there are a few islands, countries coming up that I do kind of have a little bit of knowledge about because I'm kind of deep diving into a route before I go into another route. So I have got a little bit of knowledge, but seriously, I could not make these videos coming up now over the next few weeks without this book. Matt Petrick and his wife Carrie, you know, Cocktail Wonk. If you don't know who this is, just go and search Cocktail Wonk. I guarantee if you've ever searched for any bit of rum knowledge, you will have come up against Matt's website, Matt's blog. He's an absolute legend in the world of rum, and to be fair, a little bit of whiskey as well, and not just like neat rum. We're talking cocktails as well. Go and go and seek him out, Matt Petrick. This book is expensive, but oh my God, it is worth it. So I've got lots of notes here, and I'm going to deep dive into basically the distilleries, the two separate distilleries that produce these rums. But now I'm going to kind of, you know, there's the keyboard warriors that are kind of, there's more rums in Dominican Republic than this. I'm going to reveal them at the end. I'm going to drop some knowledge bombs, which I actually did know but kind of will make more sense after this video. So let's first off deep dive about the Brugal distillery. Okay, Brugal obviously makes Brugal rum. Okay, that is the distillery there. So we are on continuous stills. We knew that. That I think should not be a knowledge bomb to, you know, anyone in particular that kind of knows anything about Spanish origin rums. Continuous still means essentially sort of column stills. Essentially, there's no start and end point. It's just, you know, the ferment, the wash, whatever is fed into the system, and it just keeps going and going and going and going. It's very different to pot still. But as I've said in previous videos, do not naturally assume that you can't get heavy rums and medium body rums off column or continuous stills. You can. However, Dominican Republic is inherently all about lighter rums. Now, the Brugal distillery do primarily focus on molasses. So obviously the sugarcane is juice, sugar is made, and then the byproduct molasses, they do ferment and distill molasses. They can produce over 15 million, I say that again, 15 million litres of rum a year. The distillery was established in 1995, but obviously Brugal, even you can see from the front of the bottle there, let's get that on a close up, you know, Brugal, the brand was established in 1888. There was a lot of history, a lot of random different distilleries going on before present day. And present day, we're probably talking in the last sort of 15, 20 years. Okay, so we can deep dive into history a little bit, but for the purposes of these videos, we don't really need to. It bears no relevance into what we're talking about. Now, here's a couple of knowledge bombs I got from Matt and Carrie's book. Fermentation time. You would never find this information unless you had someone insider knowledge at Brugal. But I love this. This is brilliant. Fermentation time, 40 hours roughly. So the ferments, the wash, the molasses is fermented for roughly about 40 hours before that's put in the still. They've got 2 multi-column stills on site. One is capable of producing 15,000 litres a day. I'll let that sink in, 15,000 litres a day. And if you think that's big, the second still is a lot bigger. It's actually, what is it? Yeah, it's 40,000 litres a day. So on site, they can produce 55,000 litres of rum a day. Now, as I said a minute ago, Dominican Republic is more predominantly lighter rums. I do like lighter rums. Again, this is not one of my favourite rums. I've talked about this before, but because of the sherry, and we'll get onto that in a second, because there is an ultra relevant part to this. But, you know, they are lighter rums, and I really do like lighter style of rums. Column still, I do kind of like that. But lighter style of rums, they have, this is the other important thing, and this is where this book is phenomenal. They've got 2 other aging facilities off site. Now, here's where my knowledge does kick in, because I've worked quite a lot with this brand over the years. In fact, in 2012, when I first started my business, I was a big part of the brand. Now, the brand has changed names and been bought out multiple times since. But when I first started my business, I was very much aligned to a company called Maxim. Maxim, another kind of company, a version of Diageo. Diageo owns Smirnoff Gordon's, Captain Morgan's, Myers, or did I Myers? I don't think they do anymore. Guinness, all that sort of stuff. Pernod Ricard own Havana, Absolute, Beefeater, all that sort of stuff. You know, Maxim, right, I think Brugal was under Maxim at the time, but Maxim, the big point here is that Maxim were kind of owners and distributors of a lot of whiskey houses, Scottish whiskey houses. Now, over the subsequent years, you know, Maxim have gone. They were bought out, I think, by Beam Global. And then Beam did a deal with Suntory, Suntory being Japanese, and you've got the Japanese whiskies. And then another company from Scotland called Edrington got involved, and it was Beam Edrington. And now I believe it is just Edrington. However, globally, there might be different distributions going on, different sort of partnerships going on. But the key point here is Edrington in the UK, which is part of the bigger, wider picture of Suntory, which may actually still be a bigger, wider picture of Beam, and Beam being Jim Beam and all that sort of stuff, you know, Woodford, all that sort of stuff. But Edrington are the UK brand owners and distributors. And I'll run through, I've written the list down here so I don't forget any, but the big players: Macallan, Grouse, Famous Grouse, Lefroy, Highland Park, Auchentoshan, Bowmore, Suntory. So, and Suntory obviously goes towards, so you've got Hibiki is the big one, Japanese whiskey. You've also got Roku Gin, things like that. And then here's the big one as well, Cavazier brandy. And before the brandy enthusiasts come at me, yes, sorry, cognac, Cavazier cognac. Now, the point where all that comes together, the point being, when you've got a big global owner like that has got access to the biggest whiskey brands in the world, you flipping know what sort of barrels that's getting aged in, don't you? And this is the big thing with Brugal. When you've got massive brands like that you can call upon with ex-whiskey casks, you know, your cognac, ex-cognac is going to be Cavazier barrels. You know, there's a high chance your ex-whiskey is going to be Macallan. A very high chance. So when you've got brands like that you can just say, yeah, we finished with that, we'll just send that over there. We don't have to buy the barrels, the ex-whiskey barrels. It's all part of the same company. There's no, essentially, it doesn't really cost the brand anything. That's the sort of quality of the barrels, the ex-whiskey barrels that Brugal can call upon. Now, from Brugal, let's move on to AFD. Now, Alcohol Finos Dominicos, AFD, isn't actually owned by Barcelo. It's kind of like a joint ownership with Yazoo, not the milk people. Now, here's the big thing, and here's where the fact bombs come again from Matt and Carrie Petrick in the book. So AFD, Alcohol Finos Dominicos, was established in 2010. Now, obviously, you know, these brands have been long before 2010. So you know there's other distilleries at play. So you know they are kind of moving distilleries, if you like. 2010, continuous still. So column still again. There's no start and end point. They basically feed sort of the start point, and it just goes into the columns. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going. So that's how that's produced. But here's the big thing. Brugal, molasses, AFD, Alcohol Finos Dominicos, sugar cane juice. But here's the thing, don't think of it as agricole though, because obviously Martinique and Mauritius and all that, they've got their own kind of GIs, geographical indicators. It is not that style of rum. But Barcelo is distilled from sugar cane juice, not molasses. And the massive reason for that is, and I can kind of talk about this because I do kind of sort of know and understand this. The big thing with this, right, with Martinique, their GI, they've got certain laws and rules about the ABV that rum can be distilled as. When you're in the Dominican Republic and you're talking about column stills, you know, your column stills will go up a lot higher in ABV. So we're talking like mid 90s, 95% ABV. Now, there's that whole argument about column stills stripping all the flavour out of rum compared to like 70-80% rum, you know, but that's you know, that's a big generalization. You know, don't get hung up on that. You know, a lot of rum geeks will talk about, oh, column still strips all the flavour. Don't get hung up on that, because you can get medium and heavy bodied rum from column stills. It just so happens that the Dominican Republic, you know, when we are talking column stills, they are producing lighter rums, which means the ABV is a lot higher, which means they do strip away a lot of the flavours that you would get inherently from sugar cane juice if you're in Martinique or Mauritius. Now, the big point to note here, because I know a few cane heads are going to sort of say, well, why don't they just distill it properly? Now, the big thing is here, like, because they are distilling locally, all the cane juice is local. It's just simply more cost effective to distill cane juice than it is to distill molasses. It's simply all it is. You know, there's an extra, if you're distilling molasses, there's that extra sort of, you know, kind of, what's the processes to go through to get your base product, as opposed to juice, which can just be, you know, cane can be harvested, you get your juice, you distill it, boom, Bob's your uncle. They need to produce lighter rums, 95% ABV. So for them going through those extra stages to create molasses is just simply irrelevant. They're just going to distill cane juice to a high ABV to create a lighter rum. That's why I would say don't think of it as that grassy, herbal kind of agricole vibe. Now, to drop in a couple of other fact bombs here, fermentation time is actually a lot less. Where we were talking about Brugal was sort of 40 hours with AFD, alcohol finos dominicos, I'm going to keep dropping that in because I can say it properly now, you're talking 16 to 18 hours of fermentation, so a lot less. And like when we kind of relate that to Jamaica or even to some of the UK brands that are distilling from scratch in there, you know, we're talking 3 days, we're talking 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Some Jamaican rums can be fermented for 3 weeks and really get all those different flavours. Plus you've got pot still. You know, Dominican Republic column still rum is very, very different from pot still rum. But actually, out of the two distilleries, AFD is actually a lot bigger than what Brugal is. Brugal, 15 million litres a year. We're talking 18 million litres a year coming from AFD. Now, a lot of that will be towards Barcello, and a lot of that will be to AFD other brands. But, and I say a lot of it, I should have rephrased that. Some of it will be to Brugal, some of it will be to AFD other brands, but a lot of it gets sold off to independent bottlers, independent blenders as Caribbean rum. So the chances are, if you see a rum that's just got, especially in the UK when we've got spiced rums and all those other rums that just says Caribbean on it, it could come from the Dominican Republic. Although it could also come from Barbados, Jamaica, El Dorado, Guyana. You know, you've got so many players. So Trinidad is another one, TLD, SLD, you know, St. Lucia distillers. A lot of these people do make excess rum and then sell off to independent bottlers and blenders. But fun facts, and this is knowledge bombs from my head, I think I'm right in saying Barcello is actually the 6th largest brand in the world for rum sold. 6th largest. That's huge, especially in the UK where you don't really think of Barcello as a big brand. Worldwide, huge. Now, to kind of tap into the rum gurus, the rum geeks, they'll be going, yeah, I know there's Dominican Republic rum I've got there. There's other brands you're not even talking about. Yes, there is, okay? Yazoo kind of do own lots of other different rums. I guarantee it, 99 out of 100 of you won't have ever heard of the other brands that Yazoo produce rum for. So I'm not even going to bother mentioning them because out of the 7 I saw, I've only heard of one and I've never really seen the rum. So there's no point even mentioning them. But I know full well there's still going to be some know-it-alls, me being one of them. There's going to be some know-it-alls that go, well, hang on a minute, Bermudez and Methuselam, Dominican Republic, Bermudez, Dominican Republic, you know, big brands, Dominican Republic. This is where your little knowledge is wrong. And I'll be honest, this is where my knowledge was wrong as well. So Bermudez has a long history of distilling in Dominican Republic. It does. And this was where I know full well what happens with Methuselam. I'll explain Methuselam in a second. But Bermudez, I did think Bermudez was still a rum distilled in the Dominican Republic, simply because of the history. It's been distilled there for donkey's years, centuries. The distillery shut down in 2001. There has not been a Bermudez distilled rum since 2001. Bermudez as a brand still exists. They still produce rum under different labels. However, they do import rum from other countries, other islands, from around the Caribbean to the Dominican Republic and then blend up and sell. So Bermudez is a brand from the Dominican Republic, but the rum isn't from the Dominican Republic. And that, boys and girls, is also the same story is true for Methuselam. And I think this is where Methuselam gets confused quite a lot because a lot of people will kind of know its history. It started out in Cuba, much like Bacardi, and then they fled. Puerto Rico, distilled in Puerto Rico, much like Bacardi. Again, and then things, and then they moved to Dominican Republic, So we've got that going on. However, Methuselam, again, is not rum distilled on the Dominican Republic. Methuselam, again, is a brand from the Dominican Republic, but they basically import rum from all around the Caribbean and blend up on the island of Dominican Republic and then sell on. Okay, so essentially, in worldwide terms, unless you are a really, really big rum geek and you've heard of these 6 or 7 other brands from under, they use the Yazoo banner, I guarantee it, the only 2 rums, 99 out of 100 of you, that actually get distilled on Dominican Republic that you would have heard of are Brugal and Barcello.